He was sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling, so still, so steady, like nothing had changed, and I was lying there next to him, staring at the ceiling, pretending I could sleep too. But something felt off. You know that feeling, right? That little twist in your gut that tells you something's wrong, even when everything on the surface looks perfectly fine. So I got up. Slowly, quietly. I tiptoed to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in the dark just thinking. A creak of the wooden kitchen chair beneath me. The soft glug-glug of red wine hitting the glass. I was trying to quiet my thoughts, trying to convince myself I was just overthinking. But curiosity? It's loud. And when you've been ignored long enough, even silence starts to scream. That's when I did it. I picked up his phone. Not to snoop. Not to start a fight. Just to see. And what I found? It shattered everything I believed about love, about loyalty, about the life I thought I was living. Messages. Photos. A name I didn't recognize, followed by a heart emoji I knew all too well. And in that moment, as he lay there in our bed, sleeping like the man I thought I could trust with my whole heart, I realized I wasn't just betrayed. I was alone. You can judge me. I know what I did sounds wrong. But behind every mistake there's a story. A reason. A slow unraveling that doesn't always start with passion, but with pain. Loneliness. Neglect. A longing to feel something again. Anything. And mine? Mine began the day Elias walked into my life and flipped everything upside down. He was everything Daniel wasn't. Warm. Present. Noticing me. And before I knew it, I wasn't just falling for him. I was falling apart. This isn't just a cheating confession. It's a true infidelity story. A story of emotional affair, relationship betrayal, and becoming someone I swore I'd never be. Not because I'm heartless, but because I was human and hurting. So, if you're still here, still listening, let me take you back to where it started. Not with lies, but with loneliness. It started in the most ordinary way. I was rearranging the bookshelves at the gallery where I worked. That was my world: frames, lighting, silence, soft jazz playing low in the background. Clean. Predictable. Safe. But inside, I felt like one of those paintings that never sells. Pretty to look at but forgotten. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years. On paper, everything looked fine. 2 incomes. A decent home. Dinner at 7. But under that routine, our connection had faded into a script. The kind where you know all the lines by heart, but none of them mean anything anymore. We stopped asking each other how we felt. We stopped touching for the sake of touching. I'd lie awake most nights next to a man who had become a stranger with the face of my husband. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't planning to feel anything again. And then Elias walked in. He was helping set up a new installation. An artist friend of mine had recommended him for lighting work. And I remember the first thing I noticed wasn't how he looked, though yes, he was younger. It was the way he moved. Like he was present in every second, like he noticed things most people didn't. He looked at me, really looked at me. Not past me, not through me. As if he could see all the parts of me I'd tucked away just to survive my marriage. And when he spoke, his voice was warm, casual, no pressure. You have a good eye for balance, he said, standing beside me, hands tucked into his pockets. Most people hang art like they're afraid of it. But you let it breathe. I laughed. I couldn't help it. No one had spoken to me like that in years. I remember brushing it off, telling myself it was just friendly, just professional. But when our fingers touched over a lighting remote, just for a second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not lust. Recognition. He started coming in more often, staying after hours, helping me with little things. We'd talk about art, about music, about nothing and everything. And slowly, these casual moments began to feel like the only time in my day when I could breathe. One evening, as we sat cross-legged on the gallery floor unpacking framed pieces, I told him about my college days. how I used to dream of being a painter. And he looked at me and said, "What stopped you?" I couldn't answer. Maybe because no one had asked me that in so long. Maybe because I didn't want to admit it was Daniel. He wasn't pushing. He never crossed the line. But the space between us began to feel like a thread, pulling tighter, drawing us in. At night, I started thinking about Elias when I was lying next to Daniel. Not in a sexual way, not yet. But emotionally, imagining what it would feel like to have someone listen to me without checking his phone. To have someone see me. That's the thing about emotional affairs. They don't feel like cheating at first. They feel like breathing after being underwater. Like finally being awake. And I know it sounds foolish, but every time Elias looked at me, I felt a little more alive. A little more like the woman I used to be before life became a checklist of things to endure. And somewhere between shared laughter and stolen glances, I stopped seeing him as just a man helping with lighting. I started seeing him as the answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. I wasn't in love. Not yet. But I was on the edge of something. Something dangerous. Something real. People think infidelity begins with a kiss. But no. It begins with a thought. A wish. A moment where you wonder what it would feel like to be chosen again. And as I watched Elias move through the gallery that night, repositioning lights, brushing his hair back, humming a tune under his breath, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of crossing the line. I was afraid I wanted to. And that scared me more than anything. It started with coffee, then small talk, then questions that reached deeper than I expected. Elias wasn't like the others who passed through the gallery with quick glances and polite nods. He lingered, not just in presence, but in attention. He'd ask about the cafe down the street, the one I used to visit every morning before marriage turned mornings into chores. And then one day, as we were rearranging a corner of the exhibit, he asked, "What did you want to be before life got in the way?" I should have laughed it off. But I didn't. I just looked at him and said, I wanted to be someone who mattered. And he nodded like he understood, really understood. That scared me more than anything. After that, he started bringing little things. A vintage photography book he thought I'd like. A playlist he made with songs from my college years. Fixing a loose hinge on the gallery cabinet without me asking. It was small, thoughtful, subtle. But it was more care than I'd felt in years. I caught myself laughing with him one afternoon over the most ridiculous debate whether Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles had the better breakup songs. We were reorganizing the back room, surrounded by rolled-up canvases and tangled wires, and for a second, I forgot who I was supposed to be. I was just me. Not the wife. Not the employee. Just Isabelle. And then, without realizing it, I started waiting for him. Watching the clock around the time he usually came by. Feeling disappointed when he didn't. Smiling too much when he did. One afternoon, he brought coffee. Not just any coffee, my coffee. The exact way I used to drink it before Daniel started doing all the grocery runs and stopped asking what I liked. He said, I guessed. Hope I got it right. And somehow he did. That shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. Because it meant he was paying attention. I started talking about things I hadn't spoken aloud in years. My old dreams. The loneliness that had settled into my bones like dust. He never judged. He just listened like he could hear all the words I didn't know how to say. And then it happened. His hand brushed mine just once. We were adjusting a canvas, and our fingers touched. It wasn't planned. But it was electric. And suddenly my skin remembered what longing felt like. The way a single touch could spark something that had been sleeping inside you for too long. I pulled back. Quickly. Too quickly. He didn't say anything, just nodded like he understood again. I spent that night pacing the kitchen, replaying the moment over and over. Not just the touch, but how I didn't want to pull away. I scolded myself. You're a married woman. What are you doing, Isabelle? I told myself it was just attention starvation. A phase. A harmless crush. But even as I repeated those lies, I felt the truth underneath, gnawing at me. I wanted to feel wanted. And Daniel was away again. Business trip. Third one in 2 months. He called that night while I stood in our kitchen, hands trembling over a half-poured glass of wine. He asked about the bills, the dog, whether I'd remembered to schedule the HVAC service. But not once did he ask about me, so I didn't mention Elias, or the way my chest tightened every time I heard his voice, or how the sound of his laugh had started slipping into my dreams. I wanted to tell myself this wasn't emotional cheating, that it was just friendship. But deep down I knew I was starting to live 2 lives. One where I wore my wedding ring and smiled at dinner parties, and another where I waited for Elias to walk through that gallery door and remind me who I used to be. The guilt came in waves. But so did the longing. And soon the longing was louder. I'd catch myself staring at my reflection in the gallery mirror, wondering what he saw in me. A tired woman with soft lines around her eyes and years of silence in her chest. But he looked at me like I was a masterpiece. Like I was still worth discovering. That's the cruel thing about emotional affairs. They don't set off alarms. They creep in quietly through cracked conversations and unnoticed laughter. They start with connection and end with destruction. And every time Elias looked at me like I was real, it became harder to remember why I was supposed to pretend I wasn't. It was one of those nights that felt like it had been waiting in the wings. Like fate had been rehearsing it behind a curtain. The sky had opened up heavy, relentless rain. I was closing the gallery late, after a long, slow evening. Elias had dropped by earlier to help me move a display shelf, and I hadn't expected him to stay long. But when the first flash of lightning struck and the power flickered, he stayed. "You okay being here alone?" he asked. I should have told him to leave. I should have. But I didn't. I wanted him to stay. God help me, I wanted him to stay. The lights went out completely a few minutes later. Just the sound of rain against the glass and the sudden, eerie stillness of the gallery. I rummaged in the drawer and found a few small candles, set them up on the table in the back room. I poured us both a glass of wine, hands trembling just enough for him to notice. He didn't say anything, just watched me like he was memorizing every move. The candlelight softened everything. The walls, my boundaries, his gaze. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. I could hear the hum of my heartbeat in my ears louder than the thunder outside. And then he said it. Just like that. Like he'd been holding it in for weeks. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Isabelle." I looked at him, stunned. But I didn't ask what he meant. I knew what he meant. I think I had been waiting for him to say it. For someone to see me and say it out loud, so I didn't have to keep choking on the silence anymore. And in that second, the dam inside me broke. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stared at him, heart pounding, wine glass forgotten in my hand. I stood up slowly and took a step closer. He rose too. We were inches apart. The space between us? It was thick with every unspoken word, every restrained touch, every aching glance we'd passed in the last few weeks. I wanted to kiss him. God, I wanted to kiss him so badly. I leaned in barely. Just enough to feel the heat radiating off him. Just enough to catch the faint scent of his skin, warm, earthy, something like cedar and rain. Our faces hovered breath to breath. My body was screaming. My hands were shaking. And my mind was yelling, "Run." But I didn't move. Neither did he. There was no music. No dialogue. Just silence and our breathing, shared in the hush of flickering candlelight. I closed my eyes for a second. Just 1 second. And in that one breath, I imagined everything. His lips on mine. His hands against my back. The warmth. The fire. The complete surrender. But then I opened my eyes, and I saw myself reflected in the glass frame on the wall behind him. My wedding ring caught the light of the candle like a spotlight. And suddenly, the guilt was louder than the thunder. I stepped back. Fast. Almost clumsily. I should go, I said. My voice cracked. I didn't wait for his answer. I grabbed my coat, left my wine untouched, and stepped out into the storm without an umbrella. I walked the whole way home soaked to the bone. Not because I had to, but because I needed to feel something cold. I needed to shock myself out of the heat I had almost given into. My husband was asleep when I got home. Peacefully. Like always. The sound of his breathing was steady, and completely unaware of how close I had come to betraying him with my body. Emotionally, I had already crossed the line. But physically, not yet. That night, I lay awake next to him, facing the ceiling. My skin still tingling with the ghost of a touch that never happened. My heart trapped in the space between shame and craving. It wasn't just lust. It was being seen. It was feeling alive again. And it terrified me because I knew the next time I saw Elias, there would be no stepping back. The next time I saw him, I told myself it would be different. That I'd keep things professional. That I'd stay on my side of the line. But it wasn't different. Not even close. It was a Thursday. The storm had passed, the air was cool, fresh like the world had been washed clean. But inside me, everything still felt tangled, raw, electric, unresolved. He showed up at the gallery like he always did, holding 2 coffees and that impossible gaze I could never meet for too long without my stomach flipping. I was rearranging prints near the back wall when he set the cups down. He didn't speak. I didn't either. Words felt pointless. I turned toward him just a little. And suddenly, his hand was on mine. Warm. Steady. Certain. And I let it stay. That first kiss wasn't some grand cinematic moment. There was no sweeping music, no dramatic declaration. It was quiet. Careful. Fragile, like we both knew if we pushed too fast, it would collapse. But God, the moment our lips touched, something inside me ignited. I hadn't felt it in years, that pure, aching hunger. Not just for touch, but for presence. For being wanted. Desired. Held like I mattered. We didn't sleep together that day. Not yet. But the line? We had crossed it. And there was no going back. The first time we made love was in his studio. The door was locked. The windows fogged. And for once, I stopped pretending to be anyone but the woman I was in that moment. In his arms. I felt like a woman again. Not a mother. Not a wife. Not a forgotten fixture in someone else's life. Just me. Whole. Seen. Desired. His hands didn't just touch my skin, they read it. Like every inch of me had a story he wanted to memorize. And afterward, I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I just exhaled. Like I'd been holding my breath for years. But the guilt? It didn't disappear. It simply waited. Like a shadow. Always just out of sight until I was alone again. Every time we were together, it felt right. Like my body was finally aligned with my soul. And every time we weren't, the guilt clawed at me. I'd lie awake next to my husband, wondering how I became this woman. I'd look at his face, peaceful, trusting, and wonder how he didn't see it. How I didn't see it sooner. The emptiness between us. He started coming home more often, trying to reconnect. Movie nights. Weekend breakfasts. And I really tried to pull myself back. But Elias had awakened a part of me I didn't know I had buried so deep. I couldn't unfeel him. I couldn't unwant him. We became good at hiding. Elias and I. Stolen afternoons. Random hotel rooms on the edge of town. His fingers brushing mine under the counter when customers came in. Notes tucked inside my purse. Glances across the room that made my cheeks burn and my pulse quicken. I started lying more fluently than I ever thought possible. Running errands. Client meetings. Delayed shipments. Every excuse, rehearsed and polished like a script I could recite in my sleep. I became 2 people. The wife. The lover. At home, I cooked dinner and smiled when my husband told me about his meetings. I washed his clothes. I made love to him on the nights he reached for me numbly, like a performance I'd mastered out of obligation. And when I was with Elias, I breathed. There was one afternoon. I remember it so vividly. The sunlight slanted through the studio windows, dancing across our tangled bodies. And he looked at me seriously and said, "If you asked me to, I'd stop. Right now." I didn't answer him. I just kissed him harder. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. Not yet. Not when being with him made me feel more alive than I had in a decade. But I knew we were living on borrowed time. Every lie was a brick in the wall closing in around me. And no matter how good it felt, no matter how much I wanted to believe we could exist in this bubble forever, reality has a way of catching up. And in the quiet moments when Elias wasn't there and my husband's eyes searched mine for the woman he married, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sure which woman I was anymore. I started slipping, forgetting things, lying more, smiling when I didn't mean it and crying when no one was watching. My best friend, Claire, noticed first. We were having lunch at our usual spot by the window, same corner booth, and I was distracted the whole time. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a message I told myself I didn't need. She tilted her head, lowered her fork, and said it just like that. "Isabelle, are you seeing someone?" My heart stopped. Not because she was angry, but because she looked worried. Like she already knew the answer, and it broke her to ask. I laughed it off. Said I was just tired. Overworked. Hormonal. You know the kind of things we women say when we're hiding a truth too big to hold. But Claire wasn't convinced. And I could feel it, that shift. The way she started looking at me differently, watching me like she was waiting for a confession I wasn't ready to give. And then Daniel. He started asking questions too. "Where were you this afternoon? You're working late a lot lately. You seem different, Izzy." I'd laugh, distract him, kiss his cheek and ask about his day. But I could tell he was searching. Not accusing. Not yet. But searching for a version of me that didn't feel quite present anymore. And he was right. Because I was somewhere else entirely. With Elias. Elias wasn't content with stolen hours anymore. He looked at me one afternoon, his eyes dark, his jaw tight, and said, "I don't want to be your secret, Isabelle." I froze. Because as much as I craved him, I also feared what it meant to choose him completely. My life wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to a marriage, a home, a set of routines and Sunday morning pancakes and family birthdays. And I wanted to freeze time, keep them both, the safety and the fire. But life doesn't let you straddle two worlds forever. Eventually, something cracks. I started dreaming of running away, just disappearing, leaving the mess behind and starting over. But even in my fantasies, I saw the wreckage. Daniel, our friends, the life we built. I wasn't just cheating on my husband. I was betraying a whole ecosystem of trust, and the guilt it started following me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I remember one night Daniel had just gotten back from a business trip. He brought me sunflowers, my favorite, and I stood there in the kitchen, holding them, while my phone buzzed in the other room with a message from Elias. "I miss you. I hate pretending. Tell me what you want, Isabelle." And I didn't know. I wanted passion and peace. I wanted to be seen and forgiven and held. I wanted it all. But deep down I knew the longer I stayed in both worlds, the more likely I'd lose them both. Claire pulled me aside again, 2 weeks later. This time, her tone was sharper, sadder. "You think I don't see it? I've known you since we were 17. You're not sleeping. You're disappearing. Isabelle, please. Just talk to me." But how could I? How do you tell your best friend that you're unraveling? That you've stepped so far outside of who you used to be, you don't even recognize your own reflection? I kept lying. Said I was fine. Said she was imagining things. But the truth was, I was living in constant fear. Fear of being caught. Fear of hurting Daniel. Fear of losing Elias. Every second I wasn't with one, I was thinking about the other. And I knew I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give. And deep in my bones, I could feel it coming. The collapse. The reckoning. The moment everything would fall apart. I used to believe that affairs happened to people who were selfish, careless, cold-hearted. But now I know. Sometimes it happens to the people who are just starving. Starving to feel alive again. And once you taste that kind of oxygen, it's almost impossible to go back to holding your breath. It was 1:13 a.m. He was sleeping peacefully next to me, Daniel, with one arm curled under the pillow like always. His breathing was deep, slow, unbothered. And me? I was wide awake, lying there, with my heart pounding and a weight in my chest that I couldn't name. Not guilt. Not yet. Something sharper. Louder. I reached for my phone, not to check on Elias, not this time. I needed to delete a message I'd sent earlier. Something too tender. Too dangerous. Too traceable. But I paused. For some reason, I don't know why, I glanced at Daniel's phone. It was right there, screen up, unlocked. Notifications glowing like sirens in the dark. I shouldn't have looked. I had no right to look. But I did. And there it was. A text from a name I didn't recognize. A woman. Heart emojis. My blood went cold. I stared at the screen, blinking, trying to make sense of it. I clicked the thread. It wasn't just a message. It was a history. Flirty banter. Inside jokes. Photos. Compliments he hadn't said to me in years. I felt the world tilt under me. I was the one having an affair. But somehow in that moment he had betrayed me. Elias wasn't the only one keeping secrets. I got up quietly, walked out into the kitchen, my hands shaking. I needed answers. Needed to make sense of the chaos in my chest. I called Elias. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted comfort. Maybe I wanted truth. He picked up after 2 rings. His voice was groggy, thick with sleep. I asked, "Is there someone else?" Silence. That silence was louder than a scream. It was the kind of silence that confirms everything. He didn't deny it. He didn't fight. Just a quiet, "It's complicated, Isabelle. I didn't want to hurt you." My knees buckled. I sat down on the cold kitchen floor, phone pressed to my ear, every piece of me unraveling. I didn't hear Daniel walk in, but I felt him. The silence between us cracked open when he said, "Who are you talking to?" I froze, still clutching the phone. Elias's voice still faint on the line. Daniel's eyes dropped to my hand, then to his phone still glowing on the nightstand where I'd left it unlocked. He looked at me. I looked at him. And in that moment, there was no pretending. No saving it. No covering anything up. We were 2 people exposed. 2 people naked in betrayal. His face contorted, shock first, then hurt, then something colder. I've never seen his mouth so still, never seen his eyes look through me like that. "You went through my phone?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. I wanted to scream. "You were cheating on me too." But the words caught in my throat. Because how do you justify your own sins by pointing to someone else's? The moment I saw the look on Daniel's face, I knew I had just broken something I could never fix. It wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about trust. About intimacy. About how 2 people who once stood at an altar, promising forever, could become strangers keeping secrets in the dark. That night, we didn't fight. There was no yelling. Just silence. Heavy. Suffocating. I slept, if you can call it that, on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wishing I could rewind time. But knowing deep down, even if I could, I might still have made the same choices. They say the truth sets you free. But what they don't tell you is that it also leaves you wrecked. I thought I could control the damage, keep my world in balance. But in one night, everything I tried to hide came crashing down. And as the sun came up, I realized I wasn't just a woman who'd cheated. I was a woman betrayed. And still somehow I was the one left alone in the rubble. Elias left town. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. One day, I walked past the studio and the blinds were drawn. The sign flipped to closed indefinitely. I stood there for a long time, waiting for the lights to flicker on. They never did. And Daniel? He stopped speaking to me. Not in rage, not even in coldness. Just silence. A kind of absence that feels worse than hate. He moved into the guest room first. Then, eventually, out altogether. Claire, my best friend, blocked my number. After 17 years of friendship, all it took was one suspicion confirmed. I didn't just lose a man. I lost my foundation. My marriage, my lover, my friends, even the version of myself I used to trust. I closed the cafe for 2 weeks. I told customers we were under renovation. Truthfully, I couldn't face them. Couldn't fake a smile while I was falling apart inside. I started going on long walks in the mornings before the sun was fully up. The air was cool then. Quiet. Honest. I didn't listen to music. I just walked. Sometimes for miles. I walked like I was searching for something even if I didn't know what. I started journaling. Not just the surface stuff. Not the curated truth. But the real, messy, ugly confessions. The things I was scared to say out loud. Why did I cheat? What did I think I'd find in Elias that I couldn't ask Daniel for? Why was I willing to risk everything for moments that always came with an exit door? I began therapy. It was awkward at first. Sitting across from a stranger, trying to make sense of the wreckage without crumbling all over again. But eventually, the silence inside me started to open up. Not with answers, at least not at first. But with better questions. I stopped asking, why did they hurt me? And started asking, why did I stay quiet for so long? When did I stop asking for what I needed? One afternoon, I decided to redecorate my bedroom. Not to erase memories, but to reclaim space. I took down the old canvas print Daniel and I bought during our honeymoon. Replaced it with one I painted myself. I wasn't an artist, but that wasn't the point. I bought new sheets. Not because the old ones reminded me of him, but because I wanted to feel softness that belonged to me. I changed the lighting, moved the furniture. Not because it would undo what happened, but because I needed a place to come home to that didn't feel like a graveyard of what used to be. I didn't just lose him. I lost who I was pretending to be. The woman who smiled through loneliness, who performed the role of perfect wife while silently drowning, who found comfort in secret texts because she was terrified to admit what she wasn't getting at home. That woman? She's gone. And now I'm learning how to be someone else. Not perfect. Not polished. Just me. Honest. Whole. Healing. This isn't the end of the story. Not yet. But it's the part where I stopped running. Where I stopped looking for answers in someone else's arms. And started asking them inside my own silence. Some days I still cry. Some nights I still dream of him, both of them. But I'm here. And for the first time in a long time. That's enough. 2 years. That's how long it had been. 2 years of rediscovering myself. Of therapy. Solitude. Ugly truths and gentler mornings. Of mornings without guilt and nights without checking anyone's phone but my own. I hadn't seen Elias. Not once. Not in the neighborhood. Not online. Not even in whispers. Until that night. I was at an art gallery opening. Downtown. Clean white walls. Stark lighting. Canvases filled with color and grief and expression too wide for words. I came alone. Not because I had no one, but because I wanted to. I wandered from piece to piece, glass of red wine in hand, until I felt something shift in the room. I turned. And there he was. Elias. Standing across the room. Hair a little longer. Beard grown in. Older. Wiser. Sad eyes, but proud. There was something in the way he stood, quiet, but certain. He looked at me. And I looked at him. No words. No steps toward each other. Just a nod. A soft one. Like a whisper between two people who used to know each other's hearts. And that was enough. Some stories don't end with a kiss. Some don't end with doors slamming or love rekindled beneath neon signs. Some end with a quiet understanding. A knowing look across a crowded room. And a promise unspoken, but deeply felt. To never forget. Not the mistakes. Not the mess. But the parts that mattered. The touch that reminded me I was still alive. The voice that pulled me out of numbness. The honesty that followed, even if it came too late. I walked out of that gallery lighter than I walked in. Not because I still loved him, but because I didn't have to anymore. Loving him was a chapter. A storm I walked through and survived. And even storms leave behind clearer skies. If you asked me now who I am, I'd say this. I'm a woman who broke, but didn't shatter. Who cheated, but also healed. Who lied, but finally told the truth to herself. Who once stood between two men and now stands fully in her own skin. My name is Isabelle. And this was my cheating confession. Not to justify, not to ask for forgiveness. Just to say, I lived through it. I learned from it. And I let go. Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Felt that pull dangerous, intoxicating, and utterly real? Wondered if the risk was worth it even when everything around you screamed no? Would you risk it all for a chance at happiness, even if it meant losing everything else? Because sometimes, love isn't about what's right or wrong. It's about what makes you feel alive. What breaks you and what makes you whole again. I want to hear your story. Your thoughts. Your confessions. Your regrets or your courage. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm here, listening. And if you want more stories raw, real, and where others won't dare to go, subscribe to Cheating Confession Diary. Because sometimes, the hardest stories are the ones that teach us the most about love, loss, and ourselves. Thank you for letting me share mine. Until next time.